Hello. Let us invite Marcus to the call. Mark invited. Dave, would you like to say hello? It's just me here by myself so far. I'm in. Oh,
Hello,
hello.
hello.
It's so good to see you today,
So good
Marcus.
to see you too. How are you?
I'm doing good. Just driving down the road. My dad says
Nice.
boogieing down the boulevard.
Oh, there you
So
go. I like it. I like
that's
the
what
the
I'm
red
doing.
seats too. That's very nice.
Yeah. It's so good to see you. I'm so excited to dive in.
Me
I'm
too.
curious about you and your process. Um, and and also just it's fun. Like I'll just say for me, if I can, to get started. Um, I've and also, can you hear me? Okay, I put a microphone on.
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Um, I also am just really curious about you as an artist in general. So like, I'm super stoked to wherever you want to take this thing today.
Thank you so much. I feel like this is like the Renaissance and you're like one of those wealthy patrons of the arts. Like you're supporting me here to be able to talk about
Oh
my
my
stuff,
God,
helping
that
sponsor
is
me to work on my
funny.
next statue here that I'm carving.
Dude, if you are going to be a wealthy person, may you be a patron of the arts.
Yeah, there you go. That's one thing. Like I used to make a lot more money, and I never regret books I bought or art I supported in terms of having
Yeah,
paid for
I
art. So
literally feel
yeah,
the same way. And honestly, I just feel like as a person, I just really get excited about any time that I have an opportunity to really see somebody doing the thing they do. I feel
yeah,
like it's very intimate and a very cool way to understand you as a person, the way that you think. But also, I always am it. You're a mirror, and I'm like seeing things because I'm witnessing your process. It's opening things up in me too. So,
for sure, for sure.
yeah, I love it. I love it. I'm excited and I also like, uh, I I love to write. I have I have been nervous about anytime I try to like pin myself down and be technical about anything, I start acting like a bucking horse. I'm like, I don't want to be. So it's fun to see it
Yeah.
through a very specific lens too today. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, that's something that's so hard is like you can't write and edit at the same time. Our brains want to do that with every line, and you just can't. You got to have the chance to get it out, and then you can look back at it later with different eyes. But otherwise, if you just stop at every line being like, well, you'll just not like we have to kind of, as you
Mm-hmm.
would understand better than most, manage the energy and the motivation of just getting something done versus trying to do it perfect.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. The making of anything, right? It's I am in the process of making something different right now than what we're talking about today, but I'm also trying not to think about steps that aren't coming yet, that will come, but be
Yeah.
conscious of steps like marketing, for example. It's like
Sure.
I'm making still. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like throw some things down as they come, so I'm not like stopping up energy. But I love that. I
hmm
love what you just said, managing the energy of there being different phases. That's such a good point.
And yeah, and there absolutely will be different problems with different phases. I ended up writing 400 pages of a novel that I'm now terrified to share for the most part. That's a different problem than like, oh, I can't sit down and write, but you end up becoming a different person at each stage to handle the different challenges. But I will say one thing I saw, so I guess two different things. One is that people have said if you write in Comic Sans, it takes the pressure off because it looks silly on the page, it's this kind of cartoony font. And so it makes you
Hmm.
feel a little bit less serious, and people will write way more because it's like, oh, well, this is just the first draft. And I feel like that's a little bit like us pitching this with our funny faces on the filter because it was just like, I don't have to feel like I have to record this perfect video. Like, so I think there's maybe a secret in there
Literally,
to just getting it down first.
yes, and I love that you point that out because honestly, something that I'm just really in a space of let's all come together, whatever that may look like. And I think sometimes people get nervous. And by the way, Mira Cotton has joined. Hello, I'm glad you're here. Like how, especially as a coach, and you are a creative coach as well. You know how it can feel sometimes to honestly just want to hang out with people and to be creative in a space and share ideas, and it's not about it's not about anything other than just like what it's about in the
Yeah,
call. And so it's
finished
like
product
the
and yeah.
yeah, the more we can just chill and hang and keep it casual, I think it's a much more fun place that is inviting, So
Hmm.
yeah,
For sure, because that's just what I realized is like my favorite life is just having creative conversations. Like even if we just get a little
yes,
bit done, the idea of talking creatively and like it's just a whole different kind of wonderful magical therapy. So the more I can work that into my life, the more I'm winning, even if it's not like, oh, I sold a
hmm
thousand copies, that ends up being way more important to my soul at this point.
yeah, I totally
Yeah.
agree. And I also just love doing this with people that I care about, that I also want to see you and your work everywhere. So it's like
Thank
I
you.
don't know that what we do today, that that however I can be a part of your experience is very cool for me. So I'm excited that you are willing to
Thank you.
hang out and share, and I'm excited to see what we talk about.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited too. And I do want to give credit to the creator that gave me this idea at I am Shay O. She does a lot of great videos about creativity in the age of AI. And her like really succinct point for this one video was just like, people want to know how you actually make stuff. Like,
Yes,
what
yes,
is the process? So even if you don't post it right away, like record it. And so I just thought it'd be really fun to do it on a live, especially because I think when we really get into the novel, there are going to be a lot of questions and a lot of things like, okay, we could go left or we could go right. And so I thought the more I could make that interactive, the more it would just be really fun. So I wanted to give
yeah,
give credit there for the idea of like actually showing this process because I think writing especially can feel like a very lonely process. And that's something that I love about it is because it's like, okay, I can hide away until I've like perfectly crafted this diamond or whatever. Like I can hide away in the cave. But I think it's also good to realize like I've been working at this for a long time. I might actually have something to share that people might find valuable. So be a little more
honestly.
open with
Well,
it.
and you know how long, like the hours, like I just posted something about the isolation part
Yeah.
of when you meet multi-talented people. You like have a lot of respect because you know the isolation that is involved in that process and the meeting of yourself over and over and over again,
Yeah.
at different points. And and then also the safety of isolation. So it's cool
Hmm.
that you're here and feeling ready to be seen, and I'm ready to see and witness. And I am curious, would it be okay if I like ask the most obvious question? Okay, let's pretend nobody knows what film adaptation looks like. Would it be okay if I ask that question, and then we can just let it rip also,
Absolutely.
because
For sure.
this
I was
is
going to
this is
start
your
very
live.
broad like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I was going to start super broad. So, what even is like writing for film really is where I was going to start. So, this is my collection here of screenplays that I've written in my lovely binders. So, I'm going to grab one for reference. So, film is written in its own completely unique format. So, you do not write it like you write a book when you're writing out scenes and things like that. So, for anyone that doesn't know, it is a very specific format. Of course, I grabbed one in half size, so maybe I'll grab another. But basically, you're writing in Courier News size 12 font and you separate out dialogue and characters. So that's a big part of it. You'll basically have your line at the top, which is location. So everything is separated out based on because we're thinking like, what are the filming locations for this script? And then
Okay.
from there, after you've said it has its own very specific format. So interior, exterior shots, inside or outside location, and then daytime or nighttime. So those are all very practical things we want to know when we're actually going to film the thing. But even screenwriters sitting in their apartment have to make sure that's very clear at the top. Next comes up an action description. This is the closest to prose where we're writing like where it is, what happened, introducing characters, things like that. But very quickly and very predominantly, we're focused on dialogue between the characters. So a screenplay is very kind of tall and skinny in the middle because that's where you put all of that dialogue. So let me see if I can grab another one here that's printed normally. I was saving on paper, so I did it like half the size.
I love
Um,
that you're sharing this, by the way, because I feel like a lot of times something that stumps people in the creative process is like, where do I start?
yeah,
How
yeah,
do I organize this thing? It's all too big. And so
yeah.
this is really helping me. Oh yeah, it makes sense you would start that way.
Yeah, so I'll get into some of that, some tips on that as well of where to even begin with creativity. But in terms of just the format of a screenplay, it's going to look a lot more like this on the page. It's very kind of in the center with all of that dialogue, and you want it to, it's kind of broken up, so there's a lot more white space, but you want it to read quick. And that's what's kind of fun about the art form. Just like with poetry, you read it very differently than straight up paragraphs of prose. You want it to fly because you just want them to be watching the movie in their heads. And that's something that's really fun about it because I can, I may not be able to afford a big special effect, but if I describe it well, then I've put it in your head. And so I can do that all by myself
Yeah.
here. And then if someone decides to fund it later, then great. But I can still kind of have all of my love of film be in this particular format. So it's basically broken down by that, action description, which is usually supposed to be very succinct, like a woman walks into a building and and then you're into that dialogue all down the center there. So it does space it out a lot too. Usually, a screenplay, one page of screenplay works out to about a minute of film time. It can run higher if it's very action heavy. It can run lower if they're talking real fast. So that'll vary, but that's kind of the industry
That's a
standard.
good
If you've
tip.
got yeah, that's the industry standard is about one page, 1 minute, which means that your finished script should be between about 90 and 120. 120 sounds high to me. I like a short movie, but that is
Ooh.
industry standard. 90 works out to an hour and a half, which of course would run a little short for our modern movies are usually closer to about 145, and then of course plenty go way longer. But you definitely, if you're starting out, you definitely don't want to write like a 3 hour long movie and be like, all right, who's going to read this? Because probably no one at the beginning. But it's still that's kind of the industry standard there, 90 to 120 pages. Oh, I should have grabbed another book I have, but Jeffrey, who of this the successful screenwriter, I've spent some time on some of his podcasts. He's got a great book on screenwriting, but he talks about like if you fall into like 60 pages and you think you're done, chances are you need to develop your subplot. So you might have had like your main character thing good to go, but he has some great tips on that sort of thing. But anyway, those are just some of the overview elements of a screenplay in terms of the actual structure. So normally you'd want to write it in a different program. You could, of course, write it in anything, but it's kind of a pain to hit all those tabs to the right places. Using a program like Final Cut, Celltext, there are lots of others, will make it so you just hit tab once to start doing the dialogue and it'll kind of automatically know where to shift everything. So
Oh,
that's a lot
that's
easier than
nice.
writing it first and then formatting it later could be kind of a pain because everyone might do it a little bit differently. So you definitely want to, kind of like in school when you had to do like Times New Roman 12 font, whatever,
Ugh.
you want to follow industry
Yeah.
standard if you want to have the best bet of your work actually getting read. Because it's not easy to have, I do like when I do music, it's like, oh, listen to my song. That's a lot easier to ask that, oh, would you read 90 pages of my screenplay, So it's kind of the joke around here in Hollywood. That being a bit of a big ask. But anyways, so those are any questions on kind of just the main structure of screenplays, that kind of thing.
Well, I do have a couple questions. I do want to say hello. We have Tall Goddess Flo, who is a designer who's just launched or is about
Ooh,
to launch, by the way, a new collection. So we have some
amazing.
creators in the space. Also,
I love
Ashley
it.
Lundblade of Lundblade House Productions, which, by the
Ooh,
way, you two have some connection. Um, yeah, I love what you. I really love any kind of practical tips that make something so big seem manageable for me. So
yeah.
I really, because for me, I can just sometimes I can look at something that is seems like a mountain for me, especially with ADHD. I'm like, oh my gosh, if I this is a lot of words, you know what I mean? It's like, how do I,
Ah,
and then get so tripped up on like, it's strange. It's either sometimes I can get so tripped up on the formatting that then it blocks my creative process, or I get
sure.
so detailed and lost in the creative that that I lose the
It has to like
process
kind
of
of come
like,
down to earth.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I appreciate these. Maybe these are tips that are not that are so normal for people who are in this industry to be aware of. But I love that you're helping us see it in case we haven't, because I haven't done any of this.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't even really see these as tips yet. These are just some of the rules, just in
Oh
case
well,
people aren't familiar
so
with that.
helpful
But I
already.
do, yeah, because I want to give a lot of different kind of tips so that people can see that you can get started from anywhere. Like there's so much you
Yeah.
can do to interact with this process. That you can come at it from so many different angles. So if you have it, because our brains are all different and we have different levels of energy on different days, right? And so I want to have if you just don't feel like sitting down to write, I want you to feel like you could start doing this totally other thing that still will
Yeah.
end up being helpful later. So I do have a lot of those for the end as well. But I just ran down to grab
Yes.
this book. The Guide for Every Screenwriter by someone who I would like to call a friend, Jeffrey Calhoun. So he's got a great book here. But that was the thing about subplots. So I want to make sure to give him credit while I had that book downstairs. Um,
Yes.
so we can jump into adaptation. I was going to talk about the particular novel I picked. Anywhere else you want to go before we go into that?
You know, I'm excited to see where this goes. But if anybody who is here would like to chime in,
Yes.
questions, let us know. But I'm here for it. Let's go into the next part.
Okay, great. So I was going to talk about the book itself. This actually just passed into public domain this January. So this is hot off the press. This book is Cimarron. It is a Western, essentially. And it's been adapted twice into movies. The first time it was adapted, it was a Best Picture winner. So no pressure there. But I think it's going to be a really interesting challenge. I'm going to go a little out of order from my original plan here, but I think it's important to mention that the author, and I said this in my teaser, did not
Yeah.
really feel like either adaptation really got what she was going for. So I want to read a couple quotes from her on this. Let me make sure I have the right part here. Cimarron had been written with a hard and ruthless purpose. It was and is a malevolent picture of what is known as American womanhood and American sentimentality. It contains paragraphs and even chapters of satire, and I'm afraid bitterness, but I doubt that more than a dozen people ever knew this. All the critics and hundreds of thousands of readers took Cimarron as a colorful, romantic Western American novel. That lit me up because I saw the movie because a couple years ago I watched all the best pictures and I thought like, oh, that was a really good movie. It's very watchable. It felt very modern. Sometimes it's not easy watching a movie from 100 years ago. It's 1930 for this one in particular, 31, and I remember liking it. And then, so I always kind of meant to read the book, but I only just recently had it brought back up because it's like, oh, public domain. I just heard about that. My fiance and I are excited because some of the Nancy Drew books just came into public domain. So when I scrolled through the list, I saw this. I was like, oh, maybe I'll finally get around to reading that book. So when I read this I don't always read forward and stuff like that. I just want to get right to it. But I'm so glad that I did. Because how about that? The idea of like, people did not quite
Yeah.
get this. Here's another quote I really like too. The great American public will never see in those stories the things that I fondly hope they contain. Maybe they'll never see the woods for the trees. I'm used to that. In Cimarron, I wrote a story whose purpose was to show the triumph of materialism over the spirit in America, and I did show it, but perhaps I was too reticent about it. It emerged in the minds of most people as a romantic Western, and it broke my heart, though the thing sold by tens of thousands. And then, as if hoping for the eternal flame, she adds, "Oh well, maybe when I'm dead." Oh, right. So,
Yeah. Well,
oof.
and also the idea of like how many artists say once you put it out there, it's not yours anymore. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it is, but it's now something else because that's what happens. Um,
Yeah.
but also really cool that like also totally makes sense that you would be a person who would pick up on these things and go, because I feel like
Mm.
you're so you really it's why you're such a great interviewer. It's you just
Thank you.
you're a person who has a desire to see a person and their intentions
Hmm.
and the deeper levels, which is like very exciting to see what you do with this. What a cool book
Yeah.
to get started with.
Yeah, and so what I did is I watched the second adaptation pretty early on, and it's very different. It is very much that romantic Western. And so it was just really interesting to think about wanting to then understand the book as best I can and then see why they might have made their choices and know that I don't have to make those same choices. I'm really going to try to stay as close to the
Yeah,
book as possible, but I can also understand why they cut and they change and they adjust. But what this really comes down to in this kind of meta irony is that in her book, she's writing it from the woman's perspective, the wife that gets dragged to the West while her kind of cowboy husband wants to go adventure. And using some oversimplified language because technically not a cowboy, but these people that
yeah,
moved
yeah, yeah,
into,
yeah.
yeah, and it's her perspective. And so they have this newspaper in town that is kind of his thing, but she ends up pretty much doing all the work because he's off adventuring and doing other things. And
Yeah.
she has this part of the book where she's like, can we just like write a couple stories for women in here? Like it doesn't have to be town gossip, but just something that women want to read, something a little more interpersonal. And so while that is happening in the story, we have this sort of like I said, the meta version of things where in the adaptations, they just want to talk about his cowboy adventures. They just want to talk about him running off with
Of
a gun and drinking
course.
whiskey, you know, all
Yeah.
this. They do not want to write about the fact that she was really excited to get new wallpaper in their home because it was the first time they had this semblance of comfort and like her old world that she left behind. And so I just think it's a beautiful way to look at gender and gender roles and stereotypes of gender and the way that we want to just focus on men's stories and not the women's stories and especially in a time when we're starting to talk more about unpaid labor by women, um how much that holds up the entire world. So there's so many great themes in this. I actually just saw an episode of The Office was on at work at the rec room, and they had this line about like Pam, where it was like, "Oh, her resume is really short, but you know what that tells me? That you stick around." And so that's a very modern reference that has the same theme as this one because there are times where he leaves for years at a time because he's off on some new adventure. She's the one still in town. She's the one trying to start a women's club and all these things that like maybe people think are silly, that like the newest trend is to make this new kind of pudding, but it's like she's just trying to make a sort of normal, beautiful little life for herself and for her family and for this community that was initially described as basically just a gash through the desert. Like it started from nothing. And even there, I want to be careful because a lot of American documentaries talk about it like we went into this empty land and we made it into paradise. We know that that is very problematic because this was not empty land. We are on stolen land here in America. So even that, I want to be careful about my language, but I'm also going to be talking in the language of the book at times. I'm not going to perform saying everything perfectly, but I certainly care about getting it right in the big picture. So I just want to say, like, there are times where I'm going to use the lingo and times where I'm going to say, but of course, you know. Um, and that's the other thing too, is that this book does have characters that represent different ideas. I think if no one talked about the plight of the Native Americans in this book, I would be like, I can't kind of make it woke after the fact and say that we should
Yeah.
actually care about people, you know. That wouldn't feel right. And but that's what's good is that they're actually the man who's kind of this idealist character always like plunging forward is very much like we are on stolen land, we've denied them all the things of these treaties, like the Americans have broken their spirit, like we're stealing from them time and again. And the wife, who's kind of more the protagonist, is the one has had much more classic but regressive thoughts about like, oh, you know, kind of this savages in a way, and that's something that's um I'm gonna have to wrestle with a lot, and I'm glad is in
Yeah.
there because I don't want to not talk about that. I even as far as my age, I remember coming home telling my mom about the Trail of Tears and her saying, "Oh, well, they were also savages." That was in like the 2000s here. That there is that language understanding
Yeah.
history gap. So that's why I like it's messy and it's complicated, and that's why I kind of want to dive into it and see what I can make of it because at least it's all in there for me to mess around with and play with. Play
Wow.
being a very light term, but I'm glad that it's talked about, you know? Um, I remember thinking like, I don't know if anyone's seen like The Greatest Showman from a couple years ago. I remember thinking
Yeah.
like, in this kids movie, they're not going to talk about race, are they? Like, it would affect everything in this movie, but they're not going to talk about it. And they do. They do like a PG version of like he doesn't want to hold Zendaya's hand and things. And so there's always this kind of question of like, like, oh, I want to write about this white protagonist in history. Are we going to talk about race? Do we have to? Like, do we have to like get
Yeah.
complicated with it? And with that, there's like an entire character. There's a black character in this book. They didn't talk about it all in the new one, and they had him die young in by an accident in the first movie instead of dealing with what it is an actually tragic murder later in the book in the actual book.
Really?
So clearly even the movie makers don't want to deal touch with the race with a 10-foot pole in the same
Yeah.
way. They can kind of have these mentions about the Native Americans, but even then they don't deal with a lot of the stuff the book does later because they a lot of the Native Americans actually end up striking oil and making a lot of money. The movies don't really talk about that. And so when we talk about adaptation, we've got infinite choices of what to focus on. And in both cases, they really want to just focus on the white guy who goes out into the West and he settled the
Mm.
land and he goes out on his adventures, and the book is more about his wife and how she keeps things running while he's, you know, off adventuring. And
Wow.
so there's all of this stuff to kind of think about in terms of, like I said, gender relations and how you do an adaptation. Um, and so I think it's going to be like really good to sink my teeth into. And I want to give one more example just on the topic of like difficult topics because a couple years ago, my mom had the ideas like we should do a musical about Luther, Martin Luther of the church Luther. We're Lutherans, so he's kind of like our Jesus growing up. And
Yeah.
so I did all this research, I did all this prep, I wrote a couple songs, and then I finally realized that like to his dying breath, he was horribly anti-Semitic,
Mm,
like to his dying breath. And I just was like, nah, I don't need to tell this one. I don't need to tell his story. Like that doesn't need to be my project. I like
mm.
that he did not like. Even his wife was like, hey, maybe lay up on the anti-Semitism on this new thing you're writing, and he was like, nope,
Yeah.
this is my
No.
main focus right now. And so it was just very easy for me to be like, this doesn't need to, I don't need to spend the next however many years adapting and celebrating this kind of hero, you know. And so there's always that
Yeah.
question, like, and then people love to bring up stuff like, well, like, oh, did MLK cheat on his wife or something, you know? So there's always this like, what do we focus on
Yeah.
and what do we not? But I feel like that was one for me where I was like, I don't need to tell that story. But for this one, I feel like because let's call them the problematic perspectives are at least acknowledged, then that's something I can work with versus like, I can't really just cut it out. That feels very wrong to be like, oh, it's easier to, like they did in the other movies to not have the whole subplot about the black character because it gets really messy and really sad. I don't want to, it's, if I want to cut out that much, I should pick a different book, you know? I should adapt
Yeah.
something else. It doesn't have to be my story to work with. So I think that just brings up some of the challenge and what I think is going to be really interesting about this. I think if I found like the perfect book that was like exactly my life story, I don't know if I'd even be as interested in adapting it because it'd be like, well, that's great, it already exists, we're good. And there still can be the fun of getting it into film language and film structure, but I think this is going to be a lot more interesting, and I'm going to have to grow a lot as a creator by kind of wrestling with this material. So that would be kind of my summary of briefly of the book, but also of some of the big challenges that come along with adapting something.
Oh, well, and so exciting. I can see that it's like to you a challenge, but something that you're also excited about because you
Yeah,
see the
for sure.
opportunity in what's been missed, and you see the idea of an honest part of a story being restored in a holistic way
Hmm.
that 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 also is something that I feel like we all really we want to see that truth
Yeah.
because that's it's part of why we have continued to live in ways that don't honor genders and gender roles in today's world. Is because
Hmm.
we continue to see these examples of where it's just this woman who's you know sitting around in her log cabin or whatever it is she's living in, waiting for the brave and courageous
Yeah.
Gallivanter to come home. And
To
I mean,
come
not that
back.
that's what
Yeah.
this story's about, but the idea that there's this you know this poor guy's got to go off and do these things, and then she's just waiting around. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
these 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 people had full complex lives. Meanwhile, there's all these really tricky things going on. I really love that you point out specifically the idea that the protagonist in the story, just like a lot of people we know, they're not perfect. In fact, we're realizing, I don't know this story, but hearing you talk about the way that she sort of brushes off
Yeah.
the indigenous people of her area as savages potentially.
Yeah. For
That's
sure.
wild because we're at least, and again, I don't live in this world, but I'm so used to seeing a protagonist being mostly, we're here to really root for him. We don't want.
Yeah, for sure. Basically perfect. Yeah, the Mary Sue.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
really cool.
it's
I'm excited for you to. Oh, I can't wait
yeah,
to
I
hear
think we
you
got to
put this
talk about.
together.
Thank you. But I think it's really important because I think, like, as white people, as privileged people, we don't want to look at our shadow. We don't want to look at the fact that we've ever had incorrect beliefs. I was raised homophobic, believe it or not. That doesn't work out very
Yeah,
well for a person like me, but that's how I was raised. And so it's mortifying to think about. But it's also like I've grown, and that's I can only say I'm on the other side of it because of that. But I think so many people, and you could, get more modern with our references of like people maybe not wanting to admit when they're wrong. Like that's something that's
yeah,
happening in our country, and so I think it'd be good to tell a story like this versus like, yeah, here's a story about the 1930 or sorry 1850s, let's call it, and none of them were racist. None of them, it's like
yeah,
there's just those stories don't all exist. So like I think it'd be really interesting to tell a story where like they came, they saw, they conquered, they built up this town, and I, as a filmmaker, am not going to necessarily tell you that that's the perfect end state. Like maybe they should have just stayed where they were and not done this, but they did, and this is the adventure that they went on to do it. And someone like me can benefit from living in California, which is very much in the state that it's in, and maybe I wouldn't have been able to had these people not done it. And so it's messy and it's imperfect and it's interesting and it's realistic, and I think that's much more worthy of telling versus what we tend to do with anything historical. You either have to kind of have a complete colorblind casting, and I love that for different reasons. But if we're going to try to make something accurate, I think let's be accurate, because I think Hollywood really struggles with admitting our racist history, with our homophobic history. I think they're a little bit more okay with being like, oh yeah, they would have made fun of the gay kid in the 90s or the 80s. We can put in a scene for that. But I really don't think Hollywood's very comfortable talking about race and talking about
Mhm.
racism. That's just been my perspective as a media consumer. And so I'm grateful that those topics all come up in this story in ways that are messy and complicated. Because I think that's much more realistic and worth talking about. Because I also grew up, as a little boy that loved cowboys and loved knights and pirates and all that stuff. So it's like I can enjoy those parts of the story and get why they love to follow the male's character, but also be like, no, we're gonna focus on the woman's perspective because she does a really good job of it, and those stories are worth telling. So. I'm excited for
Mm,
that. Can I jump into an example from the book that I think is
yeah,
okay. I
yeah,
just want to yeah,
please.
any questions you have. So one really great example of this is one of my favorite scenes I think to write is going to be when the woman finally goes back. So her name is Sabra. When she finally goes back home after like 4 years of going out into the West, her mom didn't want her to leave. She goes back to her very prim and proper, like, I think they're in the South. Or maybe they moved up a little bit. Anyway, they're basically like a rich Southern, very classic kind of family. Um, and she goes back home for the first time, and they're just as snooty as she remembered. They're just as like kind of toxic. She's a very toxic, classically toxic mother that could will never encourage her in any way. And so it's this like ripe situation for conflict. And because she's worked so hard of these 4 years to kind of start her new life and prove like, no, mom, I'm going, I'm going to do this, I can do this, I'm tough, I'm going to make it happen with my husband, I love him, I support him. And to go back home where they're just like I think the first thing, I wish I had it bookmarked here, but the first thing her mom's actually I can find it really quick. I'll show you my note cards in a second because this is how I'm kind of trying to keep track of things here. Um, Let me see. Let's see if I can find it because I really like the quote. Oh, here we go. Okay. The first thing her mom says is like, "Your hair is dry as a bone. You look a million. What have you done?" Like, just immediately tears into her appearance, being out and hard working in the sun and all this stuff. So there's this very intense scene, and then like her son starts kind of talking about the Native Americans in the way that his father is very much talking about the Native Americans, pro their experience, and so the mom is kind of like, oh, this is embarrassing for me because he's talking about all this stuff that my family's not going to get, they're not going to agree with. And so it's this very conflict rich scene, especially from an interpersonal perspective. Um, Something I've been talking to my fiance a lot is like we see all these trailers for movies where the main guy gets thrown into this big situation and he has to do something really physical and fight and win the day. And all I think of when I see those trailers is like, but do men ever have like emotional challenges in these movies? Like, do they ever have to like call out their bro about something he said? Like it's never an emotional or social thing. It's always this physical challenge. And I certainly get the
That
enjoyment
is
of watching it,
interesting.
but the idea of this scene is there's no fighting in this scene. There are no fists. It's just like the difficult dynamics of this woman and her mother and her cousins, and it ends in this great way where she's just like, man, I would so much rather be out in the desert right now than be with these terrible people. But it goes from this scene. The next scene is she's coming home. They're coming back on the train, and she's expecting the entire town to be there to celebrate their return, and no one's there. And all she hears is the click, 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 click of the Morse code machine of a telegram being sent. And so she's like, something is very wrong here. No one is at the train station in our tiny little town. This would have been a big event. Coming back home, all I hear is the Morse code. So like something is wrong. And then they find out that they had just missed this big shootout, and her husband was in the shootout, and he got one of the bandits, and he's fine. He got injured, but he's fine. And so it's this great. Then it goes from like this great emotional scene to this kind of thriller moment of like the empty train station, and then we find out like he's okay. He's just tired. He basically it's kind of a cute moment because he's like, Saber, can you just have them all leave? Like, I just want to, I'm so tired. Like, because they all want the story and they're like,
Yeah.
he's their hero and stuff. And so it's this very nice intimate moment of him just being like basically like, mommy, take me away. Like, I want to get away from these people too. So I love that part of the book. Every single movie adaptation cuts out everything about her experience and shows the whole shootout. the shootout with the bandits, this very classic Western scene of the guy and his guns and the bad guys robbing the bank. And it's not even in the book live. It's described after the fact. And so I just think like, what's a more perfect example of the woman's experience and her stories versus the men's experience and his stories that shows the way that this adaptation has been done historically to favor the heroic man at the expense of the woman's story, which is even talked about, like I said, with their newspaper, where she's like, "Can we please just have some women's stories in here too?" So I just thought that was like that's the kind of thing that I will very lovingly adapt and have all of the kind of cringy conflict of that scene with the mother, and then the drama of the empty train station will be fun scenes for me to write, knowing that like both other versions decided to cut it out completely.
Oh my gosh, you know what I also love is it's almost like the character from the book is calling out, Mark, tell my story.
Tell my story exactly. Yeah. Oh my
She's
gosh, like
like
they're
literally
proving the
telling
whole
us,
theme.
tell the story of the women.
Yeah,
Like we want a
exactly.
story that women can relate to, literally.
Yeah. And she gets back home, and of course, he hasn't been keeping up with the newspaper, and she's just like, oh, like it's even his newspaper, and he's still not like he doesn't like the day to day stuff, and he just gets excited at the next kind of shiny thing and whatever. And so he's certainly not the bad guy. He's easy to kind of
Yeah.
revere, and I also feel like it's kind of funny. He's almost like this man written by a woman because he's very romantic, charming. He's very well spoken and handsome and all these great things. But he's also kind of a man written by a woman, where it's like he doesn't actually like follow through with these things. The big sweeping
Yeah.
gestures, but he won't actually, maybe take off his shoes at the door, whatever. Like it just,
Oh, yeah.
that kind of thing. It just as a joke. But so I just think, yeah, it's like those adaptations kind of repeat the theme here. So yeah, they made these big swashbuckling Western heroic stories, but how this one ends, like he basically, I think one of the movies has him end as he's a war hero. Like one of the times he left, he died in the war. That's how they have it end.
Oh.
In the book he dies like almost in obscurity. He's just like because he already had like there's kind of a theme of him like drinking a lot throughout. Like he
Mm.
has to have like a huge cup of whiskey every morning just to stop the shakes. And by the
Oh,
end, he's
wow.
just kind of like on the outskirts of town, just some kind of loser that just wandered off and didn't ever come back to his wife and kids and grandkids. And then he ends up like there's like some explosion by an oil thing, and so that's where they find him as he's basically dying. And so like it's this very unromantic death for this person. I think he did end up like saving people in the explosion, so good for him. But he left again. He leaves so many times in the story. He left again, and we find him just as like, oh, like yeah, he's just kind of the town drunk that stays on the outskirts. Have you heard of
Wow.
him? And they're like, that's my husband I haven't seen in 5 years. Like that's his actual end to this
What the
story. It's
heck?
very, yeah. And so no wonder the second adaptation was like, let's just have him die a war hero instead. And I'm like, no, that's cheating. That is not this
Yeah.
story. The whole idea is that she's the one that stuck around and she's the one that like kept and she ends up becoming like a governor and all this great stuff that they thought he would be early on. And so she's the one left to pick up the pieces. And so I just think that's a great like story and really interesting dynamic to tell. But I think it's fascinating to look at it through like, ooh, they cut out the stuff with the black character. They make his story. They focus so much more on his perspective than hers. They yeah, make him a war hero essentially. So crazy.
Well, and I just have to say, coming from the Midwest, I've seen a lot of stories where the women are the ones who are holding down the home front, and where
Yeah,
are the men? Where
yeah,
are they? You know, and it always is this heroic story of, oh well, they're off doing these things that, and I'm
yeah.
not saying that there isn't a place for that, but
Of
also
course not.
I think that a lot of people will really resonate with the idea of like, this isn't some story of way in the past. It's like very much we see these
No,
stories
for
today,
sure.
and something that we touched base on in the call last week, even the idea of gender roles, and you
Hmm.
know who's allowed that kind of freedom to
Yeah,
just go off
yeah. It's
for
like you think she wouldn't
years.
want to just like go and like have a few drinks and then like run around with her friends for a while, but she can, of course. And I think yeah, so we can talk about like unpaid labor of women. We can also talk about how many women like are so raised and still to this day, of course, to take care of everyone else before themselves. Like they
Literally.
wouldn't even know what they like or what their hobbies are because they probably have never even thought about themselves in that way. Like
They're not
the
even
stereotype of
eating
like,
food by themselves.
exactly, like the men are watching the game and the women are in the kitchen cleaning, And so it's just such a common stereotype. And so I really want to focus on that part of it too, because like and she talks about it, she's like, this is kind of like this man's world that they've built. They left behind the
Yeah.
kind of order and structure of, to use a problematic term, the civilized version of America over here. And then they go out into this wild where they can just run around and shoot and drink and go to the saloons and then like yeah, maybe like do some ranching and stuff. And so it's like you kind of need sort of this like masculine and feminine energy and things, but I think it'd be really important to focus on those stories that we've ignored about like the women's side of this. And it's interesting, I read a whole book just of diaries of women crossing, making the overland journey, as it's called, to the West. And even in their own private diaries, they're very reserved in how they talk about things. And they don't talk about everything. Like they're certainly not going to talk about what it was like to get your period on the crossing. I would complain about that. Like that's something I would write in my journal. Like this was hell. And then even with
Yeah.
childbirth, they're like, another baby came to us on Tuesday. Like they even in their own private journals, they're still
Blessed be the
so
fruit.
restricted. Yeah. And so I just think like that really got me thinking about the gaps, if we only have these
Yeah.
surviving white straight male books as our primary source documents, that doesn't mean that these other things didn't happen. It certainly doesn't mean that there weren't gay people in the West. And so it's like that just because we don't have these surviving written down stories, it just got me thinking about that. But even in their own private diaries, they're still very prim and proper in how they're writing these things down, and they're not likely to complain about their situation. As we know, women are like not supposed to complain no matter how hard it gets. And then you could get into all sorts of other stuff with that too, of like not being able to talk about our bodies in a lot of ways, or like having to be such a hush hush thing in terms of talking about all sorts of things that are more particular to, let's call them like women's issues or something, or like there's just such a pattern of women don't talk about their miscarriages, or women don't talk about actual
Yeah.
giving birth and all these things. Like it's all tied together. And so yeah, I just think that would definitely be worth um digging into. And one thing I love about the novel too is she'll even talk about like, because you can use thoughts in novels. You can't really do thoughts in movies unless you have some kind of cheesy voiceover. But there's even points of this where she's like, she really thought a group of women could do this way faster than the men, but she loved her husband too much to even think that thought right now. Like there's kind of funny moments like that. But I
That's
just think that's
awesome.
definitely worth digging into because it absolutely feels like a novel for today. I bet a lot of women could be like, yeah, I would have been the one that's still just trying to like keep things going and get my kids off to school. Don't know when he's coming back, but I'm gonna still keep things rolling. And I think we need to spend some time admiring that work and that labor of keeping things going. It's very easy to admire the big, dangerous adventure and
Yeah.
fast horses and gun shootouts and stuff. But I think, I'm more interested at this point in whether or not she stands up to her mother or what, like things like that. I don't think she really does in this story very much, but it's still like that is a very interesting conflict versus every movie having 10 minutes set aside for the shootout that doesn't even really happen in the book. We just hear about it after. So, like I said, it's kind of some meta themes going on here.
I love that though. I'm excited about this book. It makes me want to read it. And I also there was something that you said early on. I just had a brain fog moment and I
Oh, that's
totally
really fun.
blanked. But I do love the idea of you telling the story through this lens, and especially going back to the very beginning. It really does feel like it would almost be shocking to watch the other versions of this film and then
Yeah.
see yours and go,
Is this
okay,
even the same story?
yeah, because it kind of sounds radically, like you said. I mean, it really is a different story, and yours feels so interesting. And I think about I just always have felt when I talk with you that you're a person who really honors the experience of women and holds
Mm,
women in regard, which feels really nice. And the
thank you.
idea of, I feel like a lot of times we give men credit for being the builders of the world, but it's like,
Hmm.
my God, women are the architects of the homestead. you know,
Yeah.
of this. I think about systems, I think about schedules, I think
Yep.
about all the things that have to be in place and remembered. And it really is it, like, you know, switchboard energy, like keeping all, first of all, setting up the systems and the structures and figuring out of all the things, but
Yeah.
making sure that they run. And you could compare it to I'm now thinking of like train stations, and I'm thinking about architects, and I'm thinking about just like major systems that can only function and be created by women, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I saw a funny version of that the other day where someone who was a dentist was like, if I have one more man come in and say, I'm here for my appointment, I don't know why I'm here, like I'm gonna lose my mind. Like because the women make the appointments for the men to go to the dentist to have like basic things done. And it's like I don't want to ever see a movie, but certainly not one more movie about like, wow, my wife's actually the breadwinner. How am I gonna take care of these kids? Like where do they go to school? Like what do they eat? I don't know. Like it's so embarrassing that we treat this like humor. And I saw a trailer of it like a month ago. Like they're still making these movies.
Yeah.
So much of that. But also I'm starting this great book that goes all the way back to the witch trials, basically being like, we can't, like those are really just about not letting like single women have land. Like that's why the witch trials happened, was because you can't
Literally.
have that. And so, but it totally switched something in my brain where I understood that like we can't, capitalism can't exploit men for every ounce of their labor unless everything else is being taken care of unpaid by women. So what a perfect system to set up to make and extract the most capital as possible. Treat women's work like it's unpayable. Like you don't pay women for that. They
We
love
can't
that.
define what
Trad
you do.
wife.
We
Yeah,
don't
and it's
understand what
like
you do.
it's your gift. You want to be a trad wife, you know?
Yeah.
And of course no shame to people that do. But then with men who are only expected to do what is giving their bodies over to the capitalists, we can extract every penny out of them and pay them less and less and less and less. And so I listened to another book too that was all
until
about how
until
many,
we can put robots in charge. Like the whole point is
yeah,
like
and replace
break
with that. Yeah.
down the bodies until we figure
Yeah.
out how to replace you entirely.
Yeah, and like the history of this country is basically like exploiting labor, and then when poor white people get angry, you need to make sure they don't join up with poor black people because then they're going to have solidarity. So you need to up the racism so we don't join together. And then if they're still not working and they're trying to go on strike, then hire in a bunch of people that are immigrants who will do it for less, and then you just keep all of them fighting each other instead of the top whatever percent it was at whatever decade. And it's just like that pattern over and over and over again. And we've had like I just did, they don't teach in school how many people have been murdered by police for protesting unfair wages in this country. Like that has been the history like from the beginning. So anyway, so like basically I'm reading another book, I'll send it to you, but it goes back to like feudalism and the witch trials and how like we kind of fought this system that would mean that we can't even exist on any communal land without paying someone for something and then having that labor extracted. So anyways, um unpaid labor of women and expecting men to do all the dangerous stuff because they're expendable. It's like we talk about like oh, they built all the big buildings. It's like, yeah, and they died building those big buildings. Maybe we didn't need those skyscrapers where the capitalists expected at least a man a day to fall into his death, and
Oh
then they
my
would just hire
gosh.
another one. Like that's how that. So that's why I kind of like at the end of this movie. I don't want you to necessarily feel like, man, they did that thing. They built up that town in Oklahoma. Like maybe it'd be like, maybe you all should have stayed home. Like maybe who knows? Like I'm
Literally.
certainly not
Yeah,
gonna make
yeah.
it be like this is the only way it could happen, and they did great. They still can be a story of hard work and grit and conflict and all this interesting stuff that's worth telling. But you're not necessarily going to hear from me that like the world is better because they did this. So um, all of that growth
Yeah.
and expansion, right? So, anyways, it ties to so many different things. Oh,
Oh, I
gets me
want to
amped
see
up.
this done. Oh, I love it. This is like, I love seeing you passionate about this. It
Thank
makes
you.
me want to make a movie with you.
Mm.
Like, oh, I just wish I had all kinds of extra, you know, movie money.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Well, hey,
honestly,
we'll pitch it. We'll pitch
I'm
stuff.
putting this into the world. We're gonna make a movie together. We're gonna do it.
Yes,
Listening,
100%.
all the vibes. And also it's just really cool. I'll say this much: it's really important. I feel to tell stories in this way because I literally remember most of my life so many stories. I'll just touch on the Salem witch trial because that's what we were talking about a second ago.
Hmm. Yeah.
Where I really did think, oh well, were they witches, and were they sane people, and so like I was, because of course my upbringing too, I was like, well, if these women really were evil, well then, and it took such a long time for me to, I was just talking to Dave about this a couple days ago. It's like, you know, people talk about your awakening like it's a one-time thing. Awakening
Mm,
happens over and over and over
yeah.
and over again, where you're like, I didn't know that. I didn't
Yeah.
know that. And I remember whenever I don't remember where I read this or I heard this, but I started discovering about the idea that these women, that this may have not been what I thought it was, and it was like, oh,
Yeah.
it wasn't what I thought,
Yeah.
and obviously now I would look back and go, of course it wasn't, but I literally was so, I couldn't see it. It's like I had no vision of that being a potential reality
Yeah.
so many times in my life. And so
Yeah.
stories like this being told in this way, through this lens that's more honest, I think it also helps us wake up to new realities that may also be
Yeah.
true. What else
Absolutely.
might have, like you said, like there were no gay people in the Wild West, or like there
Right.
were no, and I'm so curious. May I ask you one more question? I know you
Of
probably have
course,
other
please.
things with, so I know this isn't exactly the same. And I'm not really sure how you feel about it, but like Bridgerton, for example, very popular. I'm curious, I know that it wasn't adapted specifically from the way that they're telling stories on Bridgerton. Also, right now, are you watching this season, or am I being so cheesy right now?
Sorry, you just got really choppy in there. I have seen episodes here and there. I'm not like watching it in real time, but I saw the trailer for the newest season.
Well, so the newest season right now, they're touching a little bit on the the working class and their
Hmm.
role in society, and of course, one of them is a little bit of a Cinderella story. They're telling
Yes.
it in a little bit of a different way, though, in a way that I think is a cool story to tell, because we've been watching seasons of Bridgerton where there's all these wealthy people and they have
Hmm.
servants, and all of us are like, oh, I
The
wish I could have,
fantasy.
like,
I
yeah,
know.
literally. So there's this part of us that wishes we had that experience, right?
Sure.
There's the, and yet the story of the people behind the scenes, us just talking a little bit ago about the people who put their literal bodies on the line to create society.
Hmm.
um, their stories aren't being told in always an honest light also.
Yeah.
And the only reason I bring up Bridgerton is I think it is so popular, that these
Sure.
people who are watching, I was just curious if you'd been watching it and what you thought about the way they're telling that story too, of this person who, anyway, I don't want to get off on that. You haven't seen it, but but
No,
but I
yeah, I've seen, I'm certainly very familiar with it, but sorry, yeah,
okay,
I'm happy
okay.
to talk about it. Yeah. And I think it's a good thing worth bringing up. I think because I was kind of alluding to it almost when I talked about, like, what do they call it? Colorblind casting kind of thing. Because they have these big, beautiful casts of people of all, races and things like that. So I definitely like that because although it's just, if what other chance are these people going to get a chance to play the rich, wealthy Regency era person? I don't
Mm-hmm.
think we should exclude people from that experience if they want it. It was never really my genre. My mom grew up obsessed with all things Jane Austen, so we had a lot of that on growing up. But in terms of Bridgerton, I'm going to be inclined to support anything that women really like, anything that has elements that support like women's sexuality and sexual experience. I'm all about that. I think my fiance just like showed me particular scenes that she was like excited about. So I was like, yes, let's see it.
Yeah.
So I love
It's a
that kind
good
of
one.
thing. It's the kind of thing I'm trying to be braver about myself, and I know I've told you a little bit about my novel, but it's very hard as we're raised to basically be these kind of like, especially with religious purity culture, raised to be like these asexual beings. Not that there's anything wrong with being asexual if you are asexual, but
Yeah.
for women to kind of own and enjoy their own sexuality is an incredibly powerful, liberating thing. So I'm inclined to support the show just for those reasons. But yeah, maybe not my first choice of genre, but yeah, in terms of it being, so I guess it's your question, like how I feel about it in terms of now that's sort of starting to talk about the um, wealth dynamics kind of thing,
Yeah,
class.
a little bit, and also just how certain people are, they're just, they haven't really ever discussed certain people not being able to participate in society at different
Yeah,
levels until this
yeah,
season. And it's, I feel they haven't really made it the story, and it,
Yeah.
it just
And
seems interesting that they are.
yeah, and I think it gets messy. It gets messy, and it's harder to tell messy
Yeah,
stories. It's easier to talk when we're all in the same socioeconomic racial class, and we can just have it be whatever it's about. It's which is why, like I gave the example of the Greatest Showman because I was excited to see that movie, but I was also like, this seems like it's probably not gonna deal with all the things.
yeah,
And of course, the more you learn about that story is that he was much more like abusive and problematic than our lovely Hugh Jackman representation of him. But
yeah,
that's always the question, right? Is like, how do we, especially as you go back in time, what are we going to acknowledge? What are we going to not? Because I do think it's a big problem in our countries. Like, even now, we don't want to admit that we have this very racist bedrock of this country. Um, and so I'm kind of glad, kind of like I said, like I could have maybe found the perfect novel with no problematic beliefs, and it's exactly my own experience. And I'm much more excited about it, trying to kind of put my money where my mouth is and be like, okay, let's actually look into this because thankfully the characters at least do acknowledge that there are these conflicting beliefs, and I don't have to retroactively like, oh, I'll just make him not anti-Semitic or whatever, you know. So um, yeah, I certainly support kind of having something like the fantasy of Bridgerton. And I also think there could probably be some great documentaries about wealth inequality in England and things like that. So there could be a
yeah,
place for both.
for
Because
sure.
I also like I've always loved pretty much every adaptation of Cinderella ever. It's been a very soft spot in my heart. And maybe the idea of being able to be transformed on a special night has a
Oh
reason to
yeah,
click with me after being a very hardworking girl.
yeah,
So I certainly love those stories as they are. Yeah, you don't have to you certainly don't have to cover everything at once, but I also think we have to be very careful about what we um cut and why we choose to cut it, which is why, so
yeah.
I guess I'll tie this back into my process here. I have this theory that if I were to adapt this book 10 times over 10 years, I would write completely different adaptations each time because we bring ourselves to whatever we're doing creatively. And I think that's why it's really hard for me to go back and read old stuff because I am imprinted on the page. It's a story about completely other people, but I am in every word. It's like my sweat is on the page, so to speak. And so it feels very personal and very intimate to read that stuff because I'm like, oh, I was really struggling with this thing at the time when I wrote that. So it's a different kind of courage because we're not just creatives that are like, I learned a craft and I can structure this for a way to make this thing be entertaining. It's like I said, we're like bleeding onto every part of that process. So it's we're in there. So I do think that's interesting. I think I would adapt this differently at every stage of my life. But I think it's important to ask and think about, well, I guess first of all, what do you cut? What do you keep? And so I think it's really important to think about what are the most important set pieces. And I think there are a lot of ways you can consolidate without cutting too much or really focus on what the biggest heartbeat of the story is. And so that involves thinking like the author and thinking what the bigger intent of the story is. I think there are times. Because I adapted one novel before this and I really enjoyed the process. And there are times where there are just like an entire chapter of backstory, and I'd be like, ugh. But then you find out later that every character mentioned would end up being important to the climax. So as an adapter, I can't not introduce that early on because that also makes for a very unsatisfying ending if these people come out of nowhere and be like, it was us the whole time, you know? But how can I do that without having it be two people sitting in a room and just talking about it? I think I probably did have that in the first draft. But anyway, so there's still ways you can introduce things and hit those main beats, but that takes knowing the story really well and knowing what are the most important things. And so with that example too, it was kind of it was a bit of a haunting story. So there was different hauntings, and they learned something different every time. And I think I was able to like, okay, instead of having this happen 4 times in the book, I think I can do it in three. Still get the same ideas, still the same information introduced, but in a movie that would get a little bit repetitive. In a way, that book you can kind of take your time with those things. So I've found the adaptation process to be one in which I don't feel like I'm cutting a lot, even though of course I'm not going to have this many pages worth of content. But like even when my fiance was reading that adaptation, she was like, "Ooh, I really like that line," and I'd be like, "It wasn't mine. I took that exactly from the book. Like it was a great line, and I loved it, and I put it in." I might have cut out a little bit of a clause here and a couple of words there just to get it a little bit more succinct to the moment. But that's the kind of stuff then that my mathematical brain just lights up getting to enjoy. So yeah, I guess bigger picture. If you think you're going to end up cutting a lot, then maybe choose a different book. I was going to do a musical with my brother on a different movie that we loved, and by the end we were like, I think we're changing too much. I think this might just be our own thing now. That was the inspiration, kind of seed, but now it's kind of not even really the same story except for a couple of aspects. So out of respect for the original, I think this is probably our own thing now. But so there's always that question. But yeah, I think knowing. So what I've been doing is I've been kind of going through, I'm not a drawer, but I've been making little note cards of like a picture per chapter essentially. And then I can kind of tell like, okay, 12 and 13 are really about like the same kind of idea. So my process is going to be to keep going with this. I've written down like all my favorite quotes from each section. And I think I'm going to be able to break it down there into what is more of a classical three-act structure for film, first, second, third act. And then further down from there, there are some different key beats that I can kind of use film language to fit things in, and I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. And I don't think it's gonna be too hard. I think it's just really gonna be wrestling with some of those harder topics of like, ooh, because I'm not gonna cut this. I'm not gonna cut like I keep coming back to the story of the black character in this. I think it's really important,
Hmm.
and I don't think that's right for me to just be like, well, it's not my race, so let's just only focus on the white people, you know. So that, in terms of a structural process, will be something I look at is like I almost think of it like what are the like each line is kind of like its own melody. How can I think about like the chapter in terms of a chord? What are the main chords that are coming together for these themes? And so you have to kind of be ready to spend a lot of a lot of time with the material, obviously. But then I think to think about what is I'm going to keep coming back to what are the main themes here? What are the main story? Because I think like with my example of adapting it differently every time, like usually with a really good movie, no matter what it's about on the surface, you could be like, oh, it's really a story about fatherhood, or it's really a story about friendship, or whatever. And so that's the kind of thing that probably keep coming back to because I want to have a very faithful like structure that matches the book about what happens, but I also want to know that this has a theme that goes throughout that I can kind of keep pulling things back to. I think it will make for a much better viewing experience versus like, okay, I did it. It's faithful and here because otherwise movies like that just kind of feel like a list of events, you know. It has to be tied down to something
Yeah.
core and human. And so that's where I think kind of the theme work is going to be really important for me to look at because I love writing stories and I love interesting scenarios. But I don't always think about it holistically in terms of like, what am I actually trying to say here? And I think that's probably, if I was less scared to go back to my old work, something I could probably really tighten up in later versions. But I think really the best stories still, even though a lot of different things happen in events, they still are linked to a central theme. So I think that's something I can keep kind of working on and trying to make better. So that'll generally be my process and kind of thinking about key events um, and yeah, so in kind of consolidation is more how I think about it in terms of straight cutting and keeping that kind of a thing. So, any questions? I know that was kind of a big
No,
speech
it's
there.
so fascinating because it makes this process feel really doable for someone like me and also kind of exciting because I'll watch stories, on film, and of course, if you've ever read films that have been adapted, you have different ideas. It's always the thing, right? Everyone's like,
Hmm.
you know, um,
That's different.
yeah, I would have said they'd love this, those types of things. And so it's really kind of exciting the idea of especially I love a structure because as soon as I can understand the way something looks or hear another person's process, well now it feels really easy and doable for me. And I'm also hearing you being inspired by other people the way that they do it,
Hmm.
excited that you're sharing it in the way that you're sharing it. I do have one question, and I know we're over. Can I ask this one question before
Please,
we
yeah, yeah,
pop off?
yeah, yeah.
Um, so the idea of like what happens when you get stuck around something that you're wanting to creatively kick around and brainstorm. Do you have people that it sounds like Ashley is definitely someone you go to. Do you
Hmm.
ever have, spaces, or do you recommend that, spaces or people and connections that you would, Dave's telling me he's going inside. So he's like, lock the door. Um, so, yeah, I'm curious. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that is I've really been thinking about is I want to build a community of people that can really help each other out with these types of things. And so I personally
Hmm.
love Marco Polo as an app to send messages. I want to
Yeah,
be able
yeah,
to be the kind of thing where like we hold each other accountable, we help each other work through the difficult parts, and also can just like I want to have the kind of creative friends where I could be like I could send a message and be like in the middle of the night being like I realize something you have to do with your character.
yeah.
I know why you're stuck on this. This is what it's really about their relationship with it, you know? Like where we're really in it with each other and can help because like the cool thing about art is that when you finish it, it looks easy, but it's because the person spent a year going through being like, do I include this line? Do I word it exactly this
Yeah.
way? And because it supports this character I've been thinking about for a year. Like any art form, it's like you listen to a song from Billie Eilish and you find out that they have 500 tracks inside their songs for every harmony, every little sound effect, every like yeah, it's just so complicated, but on the surface it's just this like kind of simple enjoyable
Awesome
thing. And
song.
so
Yeah.
yeah, and you just get to experience it and have the emotional connection to it because they're doing all of that kind of obfuscated work. And so I love the idea of having friends I can reach out to and be like, can I just like work through this and that kind of thing. um so with that, that would be my thought is I want to have more people in my circle that I could be like, hey, can I just talk through something with you real quick and see what you think.
Yeah.
But the other thing I want to encourage with this process is that there's so many things you can do to be productive that aren't sitting down to write. And even other writers will agree with that. But like listening to music that might be in this case, listening to music from the time, playing games that have to do with it, watching movies that have to do with
That's
it,
cool.
reading other books. I've gotten so many different thoughts and ideas from reading other books. Right now I'm reading one of like Gentle Tamers, Women of the Old Wild West, and getting so many great ideas just for other kind of, so I think of it as almost like passive, and then
That's
there's like
awesome.
active, which is reading the book,
Yeah,
active,
yeah.
which is writing, active, which is watching the other movie adaptations. But there's so much you can do. And so there was a whole like ending to a screenplay I was working on with my brother that came to me because of a song I listened to at work. I was just listening to that one, took place in the 90s. I was listening to just 90s music, and it clicked, and it like four different things connected in that exact moment, and then the whole scene was like boom, this is exactly how it's got to
Wow.
end. And so I really encourage people to like still spend time in the world of your story, and like just like it's almost like you're kind of like seeing what kind of sticks as you bump into things in a way. But
Yeah.
there's so much you can do that is like, yes, ultimately you need the discipline to sit down and write. And I know more than most how scary that is, but there's so much. Like I'm going to go through this, I'm going to highlight my chapters, I'm going to make my favorite notes and quotes, I'm going to outline the heck out of it, and then see from there what I might need to shrink, expand. I think I've described it kind of like an orchestra. Like where do I want to build to, and where do I want to slow down, where do I want to speed up, where do I want to have it louder, softer. um, and then from there I think the writing's going to be very fast, especially because I'll have some direct quotes, so the actual novel adaptation can be much easier in that way. um, and then from there getting feedback, taking some time away from it, and then revisiting and editing. But I think there's so much in this process, even though it really is just writing. It's not like I'm making like a short film at this point. There's still so much you can do to get more inspiration and get more ideas and work through things. And then even just like I said, like I saw something on The Office that made me think about my theme of my book, that idea of like, oh, Pam sticks around like that. She was nervous about that small resume, but she's the
Yeah.
woman that sticks around while her husband is literally off trying to start his new business. Like it's very like similar to what I was just
Yeah.
working through. And so I think that would be my thought there is to have creative friends where you can be like, can I just like deep dive on this really quick and see what you think? Because I'm a little stuck. And then also, if you're stuck over here, there are a thousand other things you can do to just kind of still be in the world and still kind of work on things. Because I am excited for someone who loves so many different creative things. I also kind of like the idea of staying in a certain world for a little bit of time. We know our attention is very divided, So I kind of like the idea of
Yeah.
like this month, I'm going to be focusing on my Western. And then after that, maybe I'll do something completely different. So finding that kind of balance of when to step away from it completely. Back in my programming days, it was like, go take a shower and you're going to figure out what line of code was broken. Like, or just like
Yeah.
another one was like, talk to a rubber duck on your desk. And once you describe the problem, you're going to figure out what it was. So those apply here as well. But yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot you can do to still be. I think of it sort of like it's not even really active and passive because it's all still very moving forward. But I also don't even want to say like productive, But it's still things you can do to
Yeah.
that
It's
just are
not
going to make
always
your story
linear.
so much richer when you have all those other ideas and just awarenesses. Like I think I'm just going to fill out the world so much better because I read 20 diaries of women who had been on this same type of journey. And then the challenge is writing it in a screenplay where your action descriptions are supposed to be like two sentences. And so in a novel, I like writing prose because I can really get into the descriptions. You're not supposed to do that in a screenplay. Screenplay is supposed to be bare bones, exactly what you need to know to visualize the situation, and then you're on to the dialogue and you're on to the next scene. So but that's a really good challenge when you have all this material to then focus like what is this story really about ultimately. So that's kind of
Mm,
the whole theme here of adaptation is like what is this story really
that's
about and how
cool.
can I get it into this new format. So that'll probably kind of get
Ooh,
us as
that's
a little
so
wrap up
cool.
there.
Yeah, gosh, I'm so grateful that you were willing to include me today. This is very cool to
Thank you
see
so much
your
for having me.
process. Oh, yeah, I'm here for it. I want to hear more about this. One day I'll tell you about a process of something that I'm currently creating where it very
Yes.
much was I need to step away from this. And then as
Yeah.
I'm trying, I as I'm stepping into it, I'll like step in, step out, step in, step out. And then there's part of me it's
Hmm.
like avoid. And so it's
Yeah.
like it's funny the creative process, but I also love your helping us see there is a system, there is a structure. Some of
Yeah.
this is not non-linear. You get allow yourself to get inspiration everywhere. Love the tip about immersing yourself in the world of the people
Hmm.
that you're writing about too, to see how that speaks to your body, like
Yeah.
what's feeling alive right now. It's so cool. I just have loved this so much, and I'm so grateful. Is there anything that you want to end with? If there's a person who might want to get in touch with you, or
Sure,
learn about your creative
absolutely.
coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think I don't want anyone to feel intimidated by having to know what you want to do. There is like it's if you want to do everything creatively, come talk to me. I'm the person to talk to. But if you're also like on a particular project and you're stuck, come talk to me. If you want to have a little more structure and accountability to something you're working through, come talk to me. One thing you talked about is like the idea of resistance. This is like the Bible for that, the war of art. It is why our brains try to stop
Yeah,
us at every turn. So we can talk about that kind of stuff. We can work on building up habits that help I like with creative outcomes, like not like it for some people maybe it is writing a certain number of pages a day. I want you to feel like you're building a creative life, not just you got the book done, but also let's get the book done. So those are all things we could think about
yeah,
together, but it can also be other things too. It doesn't just have to be something so traditional as a book or a song. It can be a presentation for or business development, things like that as well. That is a very creative process that we want to have kind of an emotional alignment to. So but yeah,
mm,
kind of understanding what are some of the breaks, why are we pausing? I think it's very important to be able to follow your love and consume as much as possible the things that you already know and like, even if you don't know why you like them yet. That's a huge one. And then also, when you can, let's look into why we're meeting that resistance. What are we afraid of? What are we scared of? And sometimes that's really where you need to start focusing as well. Of like maybe that's why I got to tell that story because it scares me a little bit. So
mm,
yes, I'm happy to sit down with people for any one of those reasons because I just love having these conversations and building for myself a creative life that I no longer necessarily desire like a huge high paying job or to have I mean I still would like to have written a lot by the end of my life, but I'm less focused on that output and more focused on just building a life where I get to be a little creative every day, and that's going to be a big win for me personally. So that would be my summary.
mm. Oh gosh, what a good way to summarize. I love that.
Thank you.
Gosh, thank you again so much for your time, and thank you for going over a little, letting me,
Oh, thank you. No,
slip in a couple last questions.
of course, thank you. I didn't really know how long we were going to go, so I appreciate taking so much of this time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So are you going to be able to save this? Will I be able to put this on my stuff? Anything like that?
I think so.
Okay.
While we're here,
I don't want you to feel like you
um,
have to repost it, but if you could even just like save it after it's done and then send it my way, I'd be very grateful because I'd love to have
yeah,
this
I'll
on my
figure
stuff.
out how to do this,
Okay.
but I don't know that I can do it here while we're on the call.
Yeah, I think when
This,
it's done, it'll ask if you want to
okay,
keep
okay,
it or
okay.
have it disappear. So,
I'll
yeah,
make sure I keep it.
even if
I
you just
always
keep it for
feel
a moment and then delete it later, as long as I can get a copy, I'd be very grateful.
sure, of course, of course, of course. I'll figure that out. I'll make sure
Thank you.
I'll make sure that I do that. Absolutely. Um, yeah, I always feel like I'm such a tech person, and then I'm in front of you now at least a couple of times where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
No, tiny
So
little
I'll figure
things.
it
It's
out.
a lot to keep track of. Yeah. And thank you
Well,
for support we've had
yeah,
on here as well. So, yeah, hopefully more people can
yeah,
can give this a watch too.
yeah. I hope so too. I'm sure they will. Of course they will. Well,
Yeah.
I'll make sure that I figure out how to save this, and I'll get that over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
Good luck with the rest of your adventure. This was just so wonderful. So thank you for
yeah.
sponsoring me.
Oh my gosh, it's a pleasure.
Okay.
We'll
I
see
will
you.
talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.